Welcome to Create Your Life podcast, which inspires you to embrace the power you have to shape your own story. Today's guest is Ste Lane, a holistic health and business coach, podcast host of Radical Health Radio, retreat leader, father of 2 sons, and husband. Ste doesn't just train bodies, he empowers souls and blends ancient wisdom with modern science. Ste's path is a testament to resilience, curiosity, and what is possible when you embrace the art of discipline. Get ready for an extraordinary dive with Ste. Thank you for coming and saying yes to being a guest on my podcast. I really appreciate that.
Yeah, thank you, Andrea. I wouldn't want to be anywhere else on this fine Friday morning. Thanks for having me.
Thank you. Well, there are many things where people can see you now, but I'm curious, like how did it all start for you? Like how come you are where you are right now?
My journey into what I would call health, holistic, was one born out of a desperation, if you will. My desperation became my motivation. When I think back to what feels like a very long time ago now, as a self-conscious teenager with body confidence issues, with chronic headaches, with flare-ups of psoriasis, with not having my health, with being always a little overweight and frustrated, and the relationship that I learned about food through watching my mother and her constant battles with weights and going down meal replacement shake routes and having a good week if she did well on the scale and having a bad week if she didn't, and a lot of punishment and negativity around food. It wasn't a good spot to be in. You couple that with my familial history, where by the time I was 10, 11, 12 years old, I'd seen both sets of grandparents pass away from cancer, which was very scary. Heard conversations around like, we are predisposed to cancer, we have those genes in our family. I was just kind of a little bit, as I started to get a little bit older and a little more self-conscious of how to steer my own ship, wanting to get away from that path. So it was a little bit fear-driven at first, because I was like, I don't want to die young. I don't want to feel this way forever. And way back, when I was about 17 years old, I did this crazy thing on my drive into university called listen to a podcast. And this is before podcasts were everywhere. This was way back, and podcasts were still a relatively new thing. This would have been around 2009, 2008. And I just so happened to find, and I don't know how or why, but I found a podcast from Mark Sisson. And Mark Sisson at the time had a blog called Mark's Daily Apple, and he's really still to this day one of the OGs of the ancestral primal health movement. And it hit like a ton of bricks when he relayed his story. He was a high-level marathon runner, but he dealt with chronic issues and pain and gut distress, because in his quest for training for marathons, he was following the conventional paradigms of eating tons and tons of food to fuel those, not paying attention to his recovery, putting an ungodly amount of miles in on the road and beating up his body. And he talked about this crazy thing that he did, which was to give up grains, gluten-containing grains, things like cereal grains, bread, pasta. And for a marathon runner, an endurance athlete, to do that just didn't make any sense by the conventional narratives, because you need to carb load. And he said that his knee pain went away in his gut, and now he was here talking many years removed from that about how it transformed everything, and he had the primal blueprint. So that was my original opening of Pandora's box. I went down that route myself. I was like, well, this sounds crazy enough that it might just work. And I removed grains from my diet. And at the time, I'd transitioned from rugby into MMA. And I remember just like little injuries that I had would seemingly go away or recover a lot quicker. It was a tough sport. You know, you're getting kicked and elbowed and kneed and wrestling and doing jiu-jitsu. So I always felt like my body was banged up. And a week on this diet, and I was almost feeling young again. Now, that's a ridiculous statement, because I was young. I was like 17 or 18 years old. But I was feeling like I was in a body that was banged up, that the conventional narrative would say, oh, this is how you're going to feel. Wait till you hit your 30s. Wait till you hit your 40s. And I was here as an 18-year-old feeling like I was decrepit. So that was a really big eye-opener for me, and it just set me on a lifelong path of learning anything and everything that I could about health, because it was an earth-shattering moment. I was following the conventional narrative around what a healthy diet was, which at the time was low-fat, whole grains, lean proteins. And all of a sudden, there's this ancestral model, which is higher fat, no grains, more ancestrally appropriate foods, not fearing red meat, not fearing heavy cream and cheese. And those were all foods that I loved, but foods that I stayed away from because I was scared, because fat was so calorie dense, and fat made you fat, and cholesterol was bad for you, and saturated fat would clog your arteries. And I had all of those things ingrained in me. And lo and behold, here I am, 17 years removed from that, preaching similar philosophies to this day. But what I learned along the way is that the physical health and what you eat is a massive component of your overall health, but it is not the be-all and end-all of health, because I got to a position where I was now very lean and strong, and I looked good. My performance was high, but internally that didn't change what was happening at the level of the mind or at the level of the heart in terms of like soul alignment and mindset and self-talk. So that was the next phase of the journey, was to go through the body to get to the mind, and then to get to the mind to unlock higher levels of health, higher states of being, and then to just keep following those breadcrumbs wherever they led. And lo and behold, year after year, decision after decision, and just the consequence of time led me into helping other people on similar journeys. And then you fast forward that a few years, and then it becomes a public platform to share these ideas. And the conception of Radical Health Radio almost a couple of years ago now, which is the podcast, and just my continued drive to hopefully educate and inspire other people to go for more, to try and really live a life by design, not by default. To understand little ideas like your genes may predetermine you, but they do not predestine you. Genes are not your destiny. They load the gun, but your actions pull the trigger. And you could have came from the worst beginnings, and you can still do remarkable things. And you can completely rewrite that script. You can change your entire familial line with one decision. And that, again, is how you eat, how you think, how you move, how you love, how you live. And that is what my definition of a holistic frame is. It's just so much more than, removing one category of food. It's addition of ideas and a lot of other stuff along the way.
How was it seen from the perspective of other people that were with you at that time when you started to change the diets that was very different from the conventional standard diet, and when you started to change other things in terms of going from the body to the mind to the spirit? How was it seen by other people, and how did you react to it?
Yeah, I mean, from the dietary perspective, it was definitely seen as a little crazy, and it still is to most people. If you've been ancestral pilled or meat pilled, then you kind of now adopt these ideas of, oh yeah, of course, the foods that we evolved to eat, the foods that come from nature are the healthiest foods for us, of course. But if you've never had that exposure to that idea, and you've only been hammered with the conventional narrative for your entire life, when someone stops doing that, starts doing something that's almost directly opposite of what they tell you to do, and it actually starts to work, it breaks people's brains a little bit. So it didn't come without a lot of pushback and contention from peers, because also at the time when I found this, I found it at a time in my life where I still was a young man, and I still did a lot of the stupid things that young men did. I still partied and all of that stuff, but I also had this burning desire to go for more, to really want to push myself as an athlete. So I'd have times where I would go out with my buddies that wanted to drink, and I'd be the weirdo drinking water at 2 o'clock in the morning because I wanted to train the following day, for example. So it was there was nothing nefarious in the pushback. It was just more like, oh, you're weird, or oh, you're boring. And I was kind of like, yeah, I am. And I'm okay with that, because I want something that's different than this. And, that evolved eventually into more of the mindset, self-growth, and spiritual side of things. And I would say that was met with less resistance because of how it happened. It happened mostly due to the consequence of traveling. So in 2013, I didn't know what I was going to do with my life. I was graduating university, and whilst you get these very long summer breaks, I'd gone to a summer camp in America purely because it seemed like something really fun to do, and it was really fun to do. But in 2013, I went back to this summer camp. This was my third go at the time, and was doing that for my last time because I was going to come home after that and grow up and get a real job. I was graduating university with a sports therapy degree. I was going to be a physiotherapist or a body worker or something of the like. And in 2013, I met a girl, a woman, my wife now, and the mother of my children, Nicole. But she was from America. I was from England. It was a summer romance. How are we going to make this work? Well, she had this crazy idea that we should travel. And I had the double down crazy idea of, well, I will travel with you, but only if we travel indefinitely. And maybe we come back to this summer camp because I'm not trying to travel for 3 weeks with you and lose the job that I'm having held at home. So we both kind of collectively agreed to do this crazy adventure after knowing each other for only a few weeks and disappear off to Southeast Asia with a one-way ticket to Thailand, which then resulted in us spending 8 months in Southeast Asia. It sounds crazy, and in hindsight, maybe it was a little bit crazy. But firstly, it's incredibly cheap to live over there. $10 a day per person is activity money, accommodation money, food, and a beer at the end of the night. So it wasn't like you needed much to do it. It sounds like a real position of privilege. But honestly, if you can scrounge together the $700 to fly one way over there, you can even work your way around these countries. You can work in hostels. You can value trade with people. It's very easy to do. And in doing that, it taught me a lot about things that I'd never previously thought about, like how to redefine what success is. Because for me, success was always very material. It was like dressing nice, having nice things, having a big salary, having a good car, having reverence and respect from your peers because of what you did, not necessarily because of who you are. And then I dropped myself in the middle of these fantastic but wild places in Southeast Asia where people didn't have any of that. They didn't even have TVs, yet they seemed to be remarkably happy and close-knit, and they were playful, and they had joy, and they had like a sparkle in their eye that was very confusing to me at the time because they didn't have anything. But what I've realized is that they were rich, not in the monetary sense, but they were rich in something else. And then it was like, well, what is that something else? It seems to be, if it's not things, it's either people, or it's a more natural way of living, or is it their connection to the land? Is it their connection to God and faith? I didn't know what it was, but that was making me curious enough to try and find out what it was. And that traveling chapter ended up becoming about 4 years of life. You know, it wasn't always Southeast Asia. There was some time in Central and South America. There was a long portion spent in the Philippines, and there was almost 1 year entirely spent working abroad in Australia. And I would say to this day that if you want to accelerate your self-development, go and move to a different country or move to a different state. Move away from home, put yourself in a position or location where you have no connections, no security blanket, and figure it out, because you are forced to confront things that you've otherwise never done before. And I remember very vividly that when Nicole and I arrived in Australia, we had each other, but that was it. We had no connections, none of that stuff. We had $500. And Nicole left it in a purse on the bus by accident. So now we had $0. What we did have was a couple of credit cards with a little bit of money on them. But that was it. That's all we had. And I remember getting to this hostel, and it was pretty grimy. And there was like 12 people in a room. And it wasn't very nice. And one of the nights there was like people making out and making noises in the corner of the room under the covers. And I was like, we have to get out of here very quickly. So let's say I arrived on the Monday. I started a job on the Wednesday. I got there on the Monday, and I got immediately on a website, and I just started sending dozens and dozens of applications. I had to figure something out. And I did. On a Wednesday, I started a job. And then by the third week, I had 2 jobs. By the fourth week, I had 3 jobs and a weekend side gig. By the second month, I was running the place of the first job that I joined, because I just had something about me that other people didn't seem to have, which was like an ability to just get after it and do the thing and be a relatively reliable self-starter. So those taught me a lot about just hustle and hard work and discipline. But the internal mechanics that were rewiring themselves along the way by pulling away the safety blanket, by seeing these happy people in less developed countries and the connection to all manner of things that I was disconnected from, just was always alive in me. And then various things led to other opportunities to, get off the grid and disconnect and have no technology. And then when we eventually did come back to America, I had a chance encounter with a guide, a soul guide, who introduced me to plant medicine, which was one of the most pivotal moments of my life. I had no idea that I would go down that route or do that. And in that one night, in that ceremony and in that journey, it kind of again rewrote everything I thought life was and what was possible, and put me on a completely different trajectory again, which was basically the conception of, I'm supposed to teach people. I'm supposed to lead people, because I still didn't know this at this point. I was almost 27 years old at this point. I was still kind of drifting aimlessly, knowing that I didn't want to do the Matrix version of reality. I didn't want to work in a cubicle. I didn't want to have a normal job, but I didn't know what I was going to do. All throughout that time, I was obsessed with health. Remember, it started when I was like 17 years old. I was reading books. I was listening to podcasts. I was taking courses. I was doing anything and everything I could to sink my teeth into all things health. So by this time, when I had this crazy idea, I had a decade of soft experience of learning under my belt. And what that ceremony showed me was, why have you been learning all of this stuff? Like the hero's journey, when you get the treasure, the last step is to bring it back to your communities and share it. So I had all of this internal treasure, and I was holding it. So it was like, start an Instagram account, start talking to your phone. Naturally, closely after that, it was like, start offering people your services and ask them, do they need help? Then it was like, build a signature methodology and program. And then it just evolved and it evolved and it evolved. So there's been tons of pushback along the way. And I always felt okay with any pushback, because I knew, something in me knew that it was just the right thing to do. And your parents care for you and they love you, so they want to protect you. And when you tell them that you still don't have a real job and you're going to do this thing on Instagram, they naturally are like, what? That's not, like, what are you going to get paid from Facebook? What are you going to do? I'm just kind of, they're like, just trust me, there's something here. Now they see it because it happened and it will continue to happen, but you have to have enough confidence in your own self and knowing that, if you want to stand out from the crowd, you've got to be willing to do what the crowd won't do. And right now we just have a lot of groupthink and a lot of following the crowd and following that set path for you. And I think that that's a death sentence to the soul for a lot of people. Not for everybody. Some people are very, very happy doing a very normal existence. And I'm so happy for those people that they found peace in that. But there are certain people amongst us, I imagine you resonate with this, and the kind of people that will listen to this podcast will resonate with this, that don't want anything to do with a normal existence because they see how sick normal has become. And for those people, they have to find whatever it is inside of them, whether it's a tiny little gnawing thought that just won't seem to go away. They've got to find the end of the piece of thread, and they've just got to start pulling on it. Knowing that it's not going to give you answers immediately, but if you just keep pulling on it and you keep following that golden thread, eventually you'll stumble on something. That will be the next clue and the next clue and the next clue. And by the way, you're going to go down some wrong turns along the way, but you just got to get back on the path. And I think if you do that for long enough, you'll find it eventually. Might happen when you're 25, might happen when you're 55, but you just got to stay in the game.
Also speak a lot about like messy action and like having this one thing that you want to pursue or do and just go after it and see what happens, like even without knowing how it looks like. And what I really see is that you're really an advocate of this. And I would say it's very important, especially nowadays when there are so many information on the internet. Like you can research and find basically anything. and it's very easy to consume rather than create something.
Yes.
And this messy action, for me, it's very much connected to creating something, to not only like your product or the podcast or whatever, but create home, create their relationship with someone, anything.
Yeah. It all comes down to action. And I always say that action creates more clarity than any amount of thinking ever will. And we have a very heady, very intellectual culture that celebrates and worships at the altar of thinking, like just more cognitive horsepower, more consumption, more information will fix all of our problems, until we have analysis paralysis because we've consumed too much and we've created too little. So we have this kind of, we're moving, especially in the last probably 5 to 10 years, even more so, from a distraction economy into a disorientation economy. Which, what I mean by that is they're somewhat similar, but the sheer amount of information that is created today is ungodly. It's inhumane for our little brains to try and manage. And 5 years ago, the noise wasn't even as big as it is today. And that's adding to the disorientation piece. It is literally noisy. It's very noisy, and it's so noisy out there in the world of information that we don't even know how to listen to ourselves. It's funny that noise, the word, comes from the Latin nausea, and it makes us nauseous. It makes us a little seasick, woozy to consume all of this information. So when that is the case, and that was happening to me, and it happens to a lot of people, I think, maybe the growth-minded person is very guilty of this too, because there's so much good stuff to listen to that you think that you just got to keep listening to things, and via osmosis they'll somehow sink into you, and you're going to find the secret somewhere, and the secret will be in the next book or the next podcast. And look, I'm a podcaster. We're on a podcast. I have a social media account where I share information. So it's not that I'm saying these things are useless. I'm saying that you have to be very discerning with what you do with that information. There's this axiom in our culture that knowledge is power. And I disagree with that. I think that knowledge is potential, because it can only become powerful if it's applied. So I'm looking at a bunch of books behind me on the shelf here. And there was a time and place where for 2 consecutive years of my life, I read more than a book a week. So I was reading 55, 60 books a year. Then I had kids and it slowed down a lot. But my point being is, if you do nothing with all of that information, then those books are shelf help. They are not self-help. There is something that is required with this information. Then it needs to be integrated. But then we need to actually do something with it. And if we don't do anything with it, we can be the smartest person in the coffee shop all day long, mentally masturbating ourselves to death. But we won't actually produce anything if we don't take action. So I think that's why messy action is such a powerful personal mantra for me, because I've fallen into the trap in the past of being a person that mentally masturbates and procrastinates and waits and chases more information, thinking that that's going to somehow make me feel ready at some point or give me a secret. When I found myself in that trap, and I actually heard the messy action mantra from a coach years ago, it just hit me square between the nose, because I was like, that's the solution. And then everything that I've created since then has been in the vein of messy action. Why messy? Because otherwise we'll wait until it feels perfect. And the problem with perfectionism is it never gets done, because it's never going to feel perfect. And done is better than perfect, because perfect doesn't get done. So you can skim this a million different ways, and it's always going to come back to the same thing: action. Unless you do something, it doesn't matter. Learning is not acquiring information, remembering facts, or being able to cite verses. Learning is changing behavior. Changing behavior is taking action. Literally everything, like you said, comes down to action. If you don't do anything, then don't expect anything to change. If nothing changes, nothing changes. So allow it to be messy. Allow yourself to have the dream of starting a podcast and not wait until you have the microphone and the camera and 2026 and until you've taken the course and until, just do it. Just start. Because that version of you that starts in the vein of messy action will be 6 months ahead of the version of you that would have waited. And in that 6 months, you'll get remarkably better and you'll find out whether this is for you or not. So there is so much power in action. It should not be understated. And I think what we're suffering from in our culture, in this influence economy, where everything is vying for your attention and trying to influence you, is to be incredibly discerning with what you allow yourself to take on. Make sure it does align with your values first, so you're not absorbing the values of a sick culture or a sick individual or a sick environment. And then knowing when to say enough is enough and understand that you've just got to do the thing. Like maybe you don't need a new idea. Maybe you just need to act on all the ideas that are gathering dust in your mind if you don't do anything with them. And I think that is going to bring you so much more peace, joy, clarity, meaning than any amount of podcasts or books ever can.
We've had a couple of conversations before recording this podcast, and I remember very well what you told me about this messy action, and you kept repeating it many times to me because that was something that I needed to hear because I was waiting and procrastinating. And the way how I am approaching this podcast and the results that I'm seeing after a couple of weeks of like trying to figure out like the program, how it works, how to set it up, taking the courage to actually invite you on this podcast and everything. It's all very messy for me. It's not like I have it all planned out and like this is how it's going to be. But it takes the courage, it takes those little steps, and all of a sudden I am here sitting with you recording the podcast. And for me it was really I would say even life-changing to really have that reiterated to me and taken into account. Like just do the thing. Like, don't think about it too much. Just do the thing. And in a couple of weeks, couple of days, couple of months, it can, like something completely else can happen if I don't take any action and just keep reading the books and listening to podcasts.
It's so much easier to act your way into change than to think your way into change.
Mm.
And I think that people think that they're going to think their way into change. They're sitting there saying something like, yeah, I don't know, I'll be ready when syndrome. I'll be ready when, let me just do this thing, or I'll be ready when I turn a certain age, or I'll be ready when I have a certain relationship. And it's a thinking game. And trying to think your way out of a thinking problem is like trying to snort your way out of a cocaine problem. It's not going to work. You're doing the same thing that is causing the problem. So it is much easier to act your way into being different because the action is evidence. You could think of all the things you're going to do about starting a podcast, but thinking is not the same as doing. Now you've done it, you have some evidence, and then you're going to do it again and again and again. And all of a sudden, weeks turn into months, months turn into years. And there's a certain point where you have this undeniable stack of real evidence that you are the kind of person you say you are, because you did the thing, not just thought about doing the thing. And it is simple, but not easy, because to take the action requires the courage, like you said. So it's simple, not always easy, because it still requires the actual action, the actual movement, the actual courage. And I want to iterate that the word you said is courage, which is really important, because courage is not fearlessness. There's this idea that you just be fearless. That's nonsense. Courage is feeling the fear and doing it anyway. Like, you should have fear. If you care about something, you're probably going to have a lot of fear. What if this doesn't work? What if it fails? What if I say something stupid? What if I am stupid and I find out? Well, as the kids say today, fuck around and find out. You're only going to know by doing the thing. So you need the courage to say, oh, this scares the living daylights out of me, and I'm going to do it anyway. And I'm sure I've said this to you in the past, but I say it quite a lot because it's one of my favorite quotes. It's Joseph Campbell. It's all about this. The cave you fear to enter has the treasure you seek most. So that thing that scares you is usually the direction you need to be moving towards, not away from. Fear is not something to run away from. Biologically, there's a confusion in our cells and in our system because fear exists as a function of survival. You're supposed to run away from a tiger, by the way. If you're fearful of a tiger in your room, don't move towards the tiger. Run. Save your life. But understand much of what you fear, F-E-A-R, is false evidence appearing real. Most of your fears are stories. The story of I'm not good enough. The story of they won't like me. They won't accept me. What are they going to say? What are they going to think? What if it doesn't work? All attempts to keep you stuck. Because in our monkey lizard brain, with the beautiful evolutionary hangover that we have, that ensured our survival for hundreds of thousands of years. So you and I, we have to realize we're the progeny of people that basically survived by being quite pessimistic and quite risk-averse and quite scarcity-based, because until the snap of a fingers in terms of our evolutionary adaptation to modern life, most of life was really, really hard and quite dangerous and quite scary. So those genes have been passed on, and now we're operating in a world of abundance, burdened by choice. Like, it sounds like a wonderful thing, right? It's a champagne, oh, it must be nice to have all of these options. And it kind of is, but it's kind of not nice because you don't have the hardware for navigating that. You have a lizard brain, you evolved for the Amazon jungle and you're living in concrete jungles, burdened by options. Once again, though, until you take any kind of action and just do something and actually gather some momentum, those options will just bury you. And you will be left sitting there knowing that you are meant for more and the days are going to turn into weeks and months and years again. And you end up being one of those people that is on their deathbed, as cliche as it sounds, with a ton of regrets for not doing the thing that you felt your whole life you were here to try and do, which might not be your vocation and you might not turn it into a career, but it's certainly inbuilt in every human to try and evolve and grow. And when we deny ourselves that opportunity, we suffer a spiritual death. Like the soul is hungry too. The ego is hungry for the things that I spoke about earlier. The ego wants recognition. The ego wants safety. The ego wants people, look at me, look at me. The soul is hungry for meaning. The soul is hungry for you to do what you were put here to do. Because I don't believe, that we just randomly arrived here and we're just, drunken apes trying to find our way through this life. There's something more meaningful, at least in my perceptual view of the world, that like we chose this. We chose Earth and this time as our school, and our school has lessons and homework built into it. And if we don't do it, then we're going to spend our whole lives never graduating and never actually getting to graduate into life and live it. Instead, we live this proxy life, this shadow career, this shadow life, this shadow existence. And eventually it catches up with us. And we call it all kinds of things. We call it disease. We call it things like cancer. We call it things like broken down marriages. We call it things like mental breakdowns. It's always interesting when you study like indigenous cultures or shamanic cultures that they don't view things like cancer, one of the biggest killers of modern humans. They don't necessarily view it as a metabolic disorder. They view it as a spiritual sickness of repression. The repression of holding things in, whether that's your potential or ill thoughts against a person that poisons you from the inside out. Now you take that and you add in toxic food, poisoned water, terrible lighting, modern stressors, spraying God knows what on our food, and you combine all of that, and then you're left with what we're left with, which in America, by the way, is 90% of the population are metabolically unwell. They have 1 of 5 of the umbrella terms for metabolic syndrome, like insulin resistance, blood pressure issues, diabetes, etc. Europe won't be that far behind, and they'll be quickly catching up because the same practices that are happening here start to happen all over the developed world. So I'm not saying that all of these things can be fixed by sitting down and meditating in a cave and finding your truth, but that is a bigger part of it than sometimes I think the health realm wants to acknowledge. They think we can fix everything if we just filter our water and eat clean food. That's a huge part of it, because your physical vehicle is carrying your soul inside of it. And if it's a rusty, beat-up car with hundreds of thousands of miles on the clock that never gets an oil change and only gets the crappiest quality fuel, then yeah, it's not, the person driving it cannot have fun and thrive. So it's a combination of where these worlds meet, the internal and the out. This is something about the massive amount of information we have to think about today too, is what we do a lot of time is we outsource our thinking to experts. And I've met a lot of experts, and experts aren't that expert, actually. They're just like you and I. They just chose a certain career path and they got put on a pedestal. But if we outsource all of our thinking to them, which starts because, I believe, of the education system, which is sit in rows, don't speak unless you're spoken to. The person at the front of the class knows more than you. And if you question that, you'll be put in detention. And then you become an adult and you wonder why people don't question authority. Well, it started when they were 4 years old, because they've outsourced a lot of their thinking. And I want to invite people to insource. There's a big difference between outsourcing and insourcing. I think there is a lot more wisdom and knowledge inside of a person than there is outside of them, because they're incredibly unique. There's never going to be another Ste Lane. There's never going to be another Andrea. Like, you're a one-off, completely unique. Right? There's billions of us on the planet, but you're the only one of you. And that means, as far as I can see, that there is something that you do better than anybody else on the planet could do it, because they can't do it like you, because they are not you. So this is the law of Dharma, a Buddhist philosophy that every person is unique. Every person has a kind of a set of very unique codes. And their life's purpose is to find how to unlock those codes. And in our culture, people often mistake that for being career, right? They think that that's all to do with career and how you make money. It doesn't need to be that. People find the Dharma in all other ways: acts of service, kindness, investing in themselves, presence, love. Some of us turn it into a vocation and career, but it's still inbuilt in us to try and find that. And what that thing is to me is truth, like living truthfully with who you are, unapologetically so, even if that means that some people are going to resent you, some people are going to be triggered by your truth, but it is not your job to dim your truth to appease other people and make them feel comfortable. It is your job to live and speak your truth with as much fire and passion as you possibly can. Because if you don't, the person that gets hurt the most is you. And I don't think we should self-harm in that way.
How would you suggest someone to find that, what is so unique about them?
Well, it's in them, which is kind of cool already. So again, it's not out there. You don't have to go on a crazy hunt to find it as much as to remember it. And I think that's an important distinction. There was a certain point in your life where you knew all of this, and then you got enculturated and indoctrinated to forget. I have 2 small children at home, and you see this process happening in real time, where when they're born, there is no separation. Baby has no concept it's even separate from the mother. It doesn't know that it's lying on the couch, so it shouldn't poop on the couch, because the couch in it is just one consciousness. It's as the ego starts to form 1 year, 18 months, 2 years, they start to get this sense of self. Then they start to pick up on how other people interact. Then they start to get a sense of what is right and wrong and good and bad and all of that stuff, that they start to forget the nature of what they are, what we all are, which is consciousness. And usually you watch kids, they play a lot. They don't take things too seriously. They're absolutely fascinated by the natural world around them. They'll just spend an hour just picking up leaves off the ground, looking at them like, wow, that's cool. Another leaf. Wow, that's cool. Meanwhile, if you're a 35-year-old man picking up leaves in the garden, culture is going to say, what are you doing, man? Like, get to work. You're wasting time. So all that to say, I think we've got to become more childlike a little bit. And there's a line in the Bible. It says, thou shalt not enter the kingdom of heaven until ye become children again. And I think it's saying exactly that. Is like, stop being so bloody serious. Stop being such an adult. Adults are kind of a myth. I've met a few of them. I'm supposed to be one. I'm 35, right? I'm an adult. No one's really an adult. We're all just winging it, trying to figure it out. And I think the more we can acknowledge that we're still children, a lot of the time, even as adults, we're dealing with the stuff from childhood. And we need to remember what we've forgotten. Well, that's where it starts. Now, practically, because that was more of like the philosophical view of it, practically, where does a lot of this stuff emerge? In two places, primarily, I would say. One is stillness and quiet, which is why things like journaling, prayer, breath work, meditation, retreat, nature, those things can really help you remember what was lost. You're not going to remember what you're supposed to feel like, be like, do with your life if you spend 7 hours a day scrolling TikTok. So stillness is one. And the other one, which is a little more active, would be play. I think there's something really cool about play. Whether that was just asking yourself the question, what did I play a lot as a kid that I haven't done for 20 years? And how can I go do it again? Maybe you played a conventional sport like basketball and you loved that as a kid. And now you're like, I haven't played basketball for 15 years. Go play some basketball. And don't attach anything to the outcome. Don't do it to win. Don't do it to compete. Don't do it to get fit. Do it to play. Release any kind of attachment to what it gets you other than to have fun. Because there's something about the energy of play that I feel unlocks parts of our brain that have become a little stagnant by growing up a little bit. So I think a combination of stillness and developing that into your routine somehow, whether that's, for me, what was really profound was probably about 6 or 7 years ago, I started to meditate. And that has been a mainstay in my life ever since, because I started to... The first lot of learning to meditate is you realizing just how noisy your mind is and how noisy the world is. And it can be frustrating when you first start, because you hear all the teachers say, you have a thought, just let it go. And then you have another one and another one. And your 15-minute timer is going off and you haven't once touched anything like mindfulness, because you just... But then you sit again, and then you sit again, and then you sit again. And at a certain point, you reach that state where the mind eventually gets sick of its own nonsense, and what's left is space. And what's left in space is clarity that comes from that. So there's this really cool concept I learned from Andean cosmology. So it's from the natives of the Andes region. And they use the altar of north and south, east and west as different doors that offer different opportunities and teaching. And they call the Western door the door of clarity versus confusion. So in every one of these doors, there's a polarity of the most positive aspect of that door and then its shadow side. So the positive side of the Western door is clarity. And if we have clarity, we know, like that instills so much in us, right? It gives us confidence. It gives us joy. Like if the path is clear, it's like, yes, I'm going to go after that thing. But its shadow side is confusion. And I think a lot of people feel confused right now. Confused in many ways. Like, what do I eat? What do I do? Who should I listen to? Should I take this medication? Should I listen to these people that say don't take medication? It's very confusing because of that noise. So the element that's associated with the direction is water. So using the analogy, if I had a bunch of mud in this cup and I kept moving it around and swilling it around and expecting to be able to see through it, I'd be foolish, right? But if I let that still and settle in stillness practices, eventually the mud would all sink to the bottom and I'd get a little piece of clarity on top of that where I could see through. And then maybe through time, I can like get rid of some of that gunk. And that's the kind of Andean view of why stillness is so important, to move out of confusion and into clarity. And then what do you do with that clarity comes back to the messy action piece. You don't get the clarity to be like, oh, cool, I see it clear as day. Awesome. I know what I'm supposed to do. And then not have the courage to do the next thing. And you don't need to have the whole thing figured out. It just, you need to messy action and stumble your way just in the general direction. You don't need to get there immediately. You just need to take the next step and say, I think it's this way. Cool. And then I think it's this way. And then it's a zigzag path. It's not like, there it is. It's zigzagging up and down the mountain. And I think that some practice of stillness, if people that are listening to this don't have that, they have to prioritize it and find whatever that is for them. And that's why play can also be really important, because whilst it's active and you're moving, and these can be flow practices too. You might do flow yoga or rope flow or hooping or dance or any other thing, chess, whatever, because there is a part of that analytical brain that will go offline, and what will be left is clarity and peace and space. And I think from that place, you're much more likely to find something that's a little more true for you.
I really love that you're really down to earth when you're speaking about things, and that you don't have these pink glasses on and like everything's great. Like once you set in one direction, you just go. But you know that it's not that easy. Sometimes that it goes zigzag, etc. Which I really love about you, that you're speaking about this, that you are seeing how things are, that you don't act like someone who's got everything figured out and like it's so easy and everything. And before you mentioned that like the person would remember and find eventually sometime if they set on this path, like what they're passionate about. And I'm curious to hear what you are passionate about nowadays.
It's a good question. I have a lot of passions, I think. The ones that really stand out to me is like leadership and education and empowerment, because I really do. Because when you go through something like this and you realize that by a turn of a few events and a few critical decisions, you were on this path, but otherwise you would be living that shadow existence, and it was so close, that you realize it's possible for any person at any time to radically change the life and the rest of the life that they're going to inherit. So that's why I want to continue to just put out information in many different areas. Sometimes it's as basic as teaching people how to treat themselves better with how they eat. Sometimes it's more deep and philosophical, and I'm trying to like kick people in the butt and say like, wake up, because I want people to win. I want people to really live a life that they feel good about, not a life that they're just kind of like aimlessly existing. And I think a lot of people feel like that. I speak to a lot of people that feel like that. I felt like that. So that's still a very big passion of mine. And I don't think that will ever go away. I think it will probably morph. Maybe it's, it will morph in its delivery mode. Maybe one day I'll write a book, or I'll do a different kind of delivery style or something. But I have come to realize that I can't not try to teach and preach, as much as sometimes people around me are probably like, bro, just chill out. Like everything for me is an opportunity to like just think deeply about things and ask really good questions to people and to life itself and of myself, because I like wordplay, and the quality of the quest depends on the quality of the question. And the quest that we're all on is life. So if we want a better life, we must ask better questions. And I think we do that through mediums like this, long form conversations and content and sharing what we've learned, because whilst it's not for everybody, when you hear somebody speak and it resonates with you, what is resonating with you inside is the permission slip that could be you too. That actually, exactly what you said, I am the furthest thing from special. I didn't come in to the world with the silver spoon and this whole thing laid out. I don't have incredible genetics, like none of that stuff. It's just consequence of following that truth. And if I can do it, literally anybody can do it. And it is up to them. It's not my path, it's your path. I'm just trying to help you say, am I on my path or am I on my parents' path, for example? So I'm always going to be passionate about that. Right now, I'm very passionate about fatherhood because the future is really important, I think. And when you have children, you realize that they are watching everything that you do and they're listening to what you say, but they're really watching what you do and who you are and how you treat people, and not what you say your values are, but how you live them, and teaching them things about honoring their truth. And I can only do that if I'm honoring my truth. And what does it mean to hand over the reins of the world to the future generations, and hopefully know that you want to talk about legacy, that about the best thing you can do from a legacy perspective is to try and leave the world better than you found it. And that's through what I can do, hopefully by helping other people, but who I leave behind that carry this message forward in their own way and do what they want to do. And also passionate about always trying to improve as a husband and not get so pulled by one of the vocations like teaching and education that I forget to neglect and nourish, my wife and that relationship. And then I'm passionate about the human things in me as well, like the egoic things that I like. And I'm not at war with my ego. I don't think the ego is like a bad thing. It's like a puppy that needs to be trained. If it doesn't get trained well, it pees where it shouldn't and it poops where it shouldn't and it bites the neighbor and it's not very well behaved. But if you know you have an ego and that ego can be channeled to be an incredible ally, but if it runs the show, it's a tyrannical ruler. But as an ally, it's wonderful to know what you enjoy and then to do that in a healthy way. So like I'm passionate about fitness. I'm passionate about working out. I love some competitive camaraderie. I like to fight. I like to do jujitsu. I like to beat people up. And when I get beat up, I like to come back and try and get beat up less next time. Like these are the human things as well that I'm very passionate about. So I think it spans numerous things, but I just want to keep learning and I want to keep sharing. And I think, that speaks amongst all other areas. And I think that is a kind of like a core defining value and principle for me, that if I can adopt that and keep it forefront of mind, that it'll take care of the other things too. It'll take care of the fatherhood piece. It'll take care of the marriage piece. Not going to be perfect, but I'm constantly just thinking about how to slowly get better and leave a positive mark on the people that I interact with and people that are in my own home and in my own communities. And those are probably the things that I'm most passionate about.
Thank you very much for sharing that. It was beautiful to hear what you are passionate about. And how does your life look like now? Like your days, weeks, what practices do you do? Like after having such an experience with various practices and modalities and hearing so much about like diet and how everyone like should eat or not eat, like what have you decided to choose now for yourself in terms of diet, in terms of practices? And also what I heard from what you were sharing before, there's a large element of the people in your life as well, like the societal aspect of it, relationships.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think, from a high level perspective, the life that I live is purposefully slower and more in line with nature. And then it's punctuated with, fast bouts of intense exercise or whatever. So the large view of life is peaceful. I think peace is what we want a lot of the time. So we moved away several years ago from a busier place in Florida to the rural countryside of Tennessee. And I'm in a nice little home on the end of a dead-end road surrounded by 12 acres of land. And that land is peaceful in itself. You know, like if I go out into the yard, the only sounds that I'm going to hear are the sounds of nature. I don't hear traffic. I don't hear trucks. I don't hear planes, trains, ambulances, sirens. Sometimes I hear my kids screaming when they get into a fight on the trampoline, but for the most part, it's very, very peaceful. And I think this is very alive in men in particular. If you want peace, you have to go to war with yourself. There is some kind of ancestral hangover that knows we need to fight for something or fight against ourselves to really find peace. And I have a certain constitution where I know that if I do not move out that energy each day, then I'm not my best self. So that ties into what I do in terms of honoring that for myself, which is sometimes difficult because it conflicts with other values. For example, like if I want to be a very present father and I need to move my body and exercise hard. So where that would get in trouble is if I prioritize the movement and exercise piece over my family by taking 2 hours of my day to go to the gym, to exercise, which would make me feel good. But now I've deprived my family of that presence. So that means that I can have both. You can have both. The way you do it is, for me right now in this season of life, that means getting up at 4 a.m., which is not a fun time to be awake, but it gives me the 2 hours that I need for myself before the children wake up, before my wife's awake, so I can have the darkness. There's something very powerful about that time of day when nobody else is awake and the world is still. Even if you're in a city, it's kind of quiet at 4 a.m. Nothing is happening at that hour, you know, and there's something about the wisdom of that peace. So I'll find that peace in the morning, various ways. A lot of the time it's just kind of sitting down quietly in front of the red light, meditating, thinking. I'll have like a slowish start to the morning, and then I'll get in the car and I'll drive to the gym, and then I'll turn it up, and that's where the peace will be punctuated with the war. You know, throw some kettlebells around, or I'll do some crazy workout with a bunch of gym buddies that I have. And then it's home. And then it's home just as the kids are rising, and it's slow mornings. Slow, nourishing mornings, coffee with the wife, make the kids breakfast, feed them good, healthy food, spend an hour with them, help them get ready, and then retreat into the office to do the work, you know, the vocational stuff, jump on a podcast, do some research, work on a program, answer the DMs on Instagram, help people, think about, I haven't made content in a while. What do I want to make content about today? What feels alive in me that I'd like to share? And then, you know, be able to close the laptop at a certain time of day and leave this room and leave the work behind and transition back into dad mode and go back to being with the kids, being playful, cooking them nourishing food again, spending a little bit of time with the wife in the evening if I can before falling asleep because I got up at 4 a.m. So we go to bed ridiculously early, but sometimes we'll hang out and make it past 8 p.m. So that as a high level view of the pace of life. And then from the food perspective piece is just really honoring. You can get kind of neurotic in the diet space because there's all manner of different opinions, everything from raw food veganism to raw meat carnivorism to something in the middle, to eat whatever you want in moderation, to track your macros, to blah, blah, blah. What I've landed on for me and what I coach people on the most, which I think is the easiest, most best bang for your buck kind of philosophy around food, is something like what I would coin as an animal-based diet, which is where you get most of your nutrition from animal products. And that doesn't just mean eating steaks. It means really honoring this nose to tail principle of eating, where all parts of the animal gets consumed. So last night, for example, I had oxtail stew. An oxtail is something that nobody eats anymore. It's the tail of the animal. It's incredibly gelatinous and rich, tons of connective tissue in it. And what was in that stew? Locally sourced carrots and local onions and potatoes and bone broth. And I have some marrow bones in the fridge today that I'm going to put in the Instant Pot to make some bone broth. And then I love a good ribeye. I think just earth-grown nutrients are the key to us thriving. And I think that if you adopt something like an animal-based diet, which the other constituents of that diet would be layering in the things that nature offers again, that are real food, not coming from a factory, in terms of the plant matter and the other matter. So the plants would be prioritizing things like seasonal fruits. I believe that fruits are the offering of the plant. They're bright, they're sweet, they're delicious. They kind of signal, hey, eat me. I want to be eaten. I want to spread my seed. I'm not crazy about vegetables. Or like the brassica family of vegetables, the dark leafy greens, because they firstly don't exist in the wild. They're a very domesticated plant. We've been told are the healthiest foods for us, but they do come with some potential detriments for people, especially if they're sensitive to certain foods. Oxalate crystals, plant toxins like phytates and lectins, for example. And they're rooted in the ground. They can run away, defend themselves, growl. They're dark, they're bitter. They don't taste very good unless you put a boatload of butter on them. I'm not sure those things are the healthiest foods for us. I'm not sure those things want to be eaten in the same way that fruit does. So I think the optimal human diet looks a lot like a nose-to-tail animal-based diet with your meats and your connective tissues and your organs, liver, heart, kidney, spleen, even some of the glandulars like thyroid and testicle, things that we have eaten on our evolutionary timeline that people don't eat now because like, ew, gross, I don't like that. Paired with seasonal, in-season fruits and root vegetables I'm a fan of. So your potatoes, your squashes, your tomatoes, avocados, those kinds of things. And then a big proponent of dairy, raw dairy in particular, which is the unpasteurized, unhomogenized raw dairy, which I think is one of the true superfoods of our time. I think you have to be careful about sourcing and make sure it's coming from a factory not from a factory. That would be the pasteurized milk, but coming from a farm where the cow lived a natural life, sunlight and grass, and it produces this incredible complete food full of digestive enzymes. Macronutrients are perfectly balanced. They're it's a living food. In fact, there's a really interesting study where they inoculated pasteurized milk and they inoculated raw milk with a common bacteria. And the raw milk is so alive that it itself fought off the bacteria and became a very safe to drink food. Wouldn't advise it, but it's a very interesting thing. When they put the same inoculation of bacteria in the pasteurized milk, it went rancid and putrid almost immediately because the pasteurization process kills the living element of the food. And everybody's kind of aware of this idea of probiotics being good for your brain, being good for your gut, and your gut being your second brain, and this impacts how you feel and things like that. So that's kind of what my diet looks like. And I believe if people build so tangibly, that might be, some eggs and, some potatoes in the morning or a leftover stew with a bit of last night's leftover protein. And you're constantly trying to get a good serving of animal protein and fat on your plate because it's the most satiating and nourishing, and then adding in the other things for micronutrients and enjoyment too. I think you should love the food that you eat. And I think if you do that, it removes the need for most people to worry about things like, how many calories am I having and what's my macronutrient breakdown looks like? And because those things seem to be reserved for the people that want to keep indulging in foods that, and I'm not against this, I just don't think it's the healthiest way to live. If you want to keep eating pizza and pasta and commercial Chinese foods and ice cream and crackers and cakes, then yeah, you're probably going to need to start tracking your calories and macronutrients because those foods are incredibly easy to overeat. They are micronutrient devoid. They create a population that is overfed but undernourished. They get a lot of calories, but they don't get a lot of nutrition for those calories. And I don't think that that's the way we're designed to eat. And I think that even if some people look good physically doing that by controlling calories internally, there's some unintended consequences there. And ultimately, I don't want to have people have to track food in an app and have to micromanage and weigh how much chicken breast they're eating and weigh how much steamed broccoli they're going to have. I think if we just live a little bit more naturally, which includes the food piece and the light piece and the stress piece and appropriate doses of exercise and sleep and all of those things, that you can kind of get to a point where, whilst it's very confusing for a lot of people out there in the health space, that again, you cut through a lot of that noise and realize it's unbelievably simple. It's not always easy, again, but it is simple. That the food that nature provides is the food that heals and helps us to thrive. And a lot of the stuff that is admittedly incredibly tasty that comes from labs or is just unnatural. Like McDonald's French fries in the United States have 19 ingredients, which doesn't make any sense because French fries should be potatoes, a frying oil, and salt. And ideally that frying oil should be something like tallow, because it's a high heat natural thing again, not seed oils, not a canola oil, not a corn oil, because those things have been heated, processed with hexane, deodorized, bleached. It's simple when you lay it out and you have this distinction of food. Food is things that came from the ground, fell from a tree, had eyes and a heartbeat, came from the ocean. That's food. Things that have a list of ingredients as long as your arm and can stay in a box for weeks and months, or are prepared by most establishments, restaurants, and fast food. Not food. Food, like substances, will fill you up, will give you energy, but nothing like real food will. And I think if people adopt that mentality around food, it can be really freeing to just decide food and not food. And if I just eat food, then the cravings for the not food go away, because nothing tastes as good as the healthy feels. And I think that more people would be well served by trying to eat more real food, which is kind of funny that it's a controversial statement these days, because a lot of the evidence-based crowd, or the intelligentsia, the mafia, the PhDs and the doctors will tell you that the real food that I'm talking about shouldn't be eaten that much because it's dangerous, saturated fat and cholesterol. We should be low fat and plant-based. And I just don't think that is correct. And I don't think that's going to lead to optimal health and thriving, which I think hopefully the kind of person that's listening to this show wants optimal, not just okay, not just surviving, but thriving.
You've talked a lot on the Instagram and other places about like plant-based versus animal-based diets. And nowadays there are a lot of people speaking about like how it's cruel to eat animals, and that because of that they don't want to do that, and they rather opt for a plant-based diet to avoid this. And there are other arguments that are against the meat. What would you say about this?
Yeah, I would say that philosophical argument from plant-based and vegan advocates is the best one that they have, because it's true. If you acknowledge that to have life requires taking life, that's a difficult thing to wrap your head around. And I think sometimes the vegan myth is that you can have a bloodless life and a bloodless plate, and that choosing to eat meat is choosing to condemn those animals to death for your enjoyment. Now, it gets tricky, because I would say that if you remove the foods that you are designed to thrive on, and we have some very real evidence-based contradictions to the vegan diet from its nutritional components, for example, the lack of creatine, carnitine, choline, vitamin A in retinol form, vitamin D, broad-spectrum B vitamins, the amino acids of the proteins are not as bioavailable. And if we do that for a long enough time, what happens almost invariably is that person hurts themselves. So you can protect the animals by injuring the animal that is you. And it's an interesting contradiction. If you're okay with that, and you would rather sacrifice yourself over the animals, I have no problem with that. But you have to square the circle that that's what you're choosing. And I am choosing to try and do the most good in this world and be the healthiest that I can be to spread the message. And that requires, as far as I can see it, I believe, ancestrally and nutritionally, the inclusion of animal products. And I also live a very different existence to a lot of these people that can kind of throw stones in their glass house that don't understand how food works. So many plant-based and vegan advocates are kind of new age, trendy types. They live in cities or suburbs. They're so disconnected from how food is grown the inputs, the outputs, the fact that plowing fields does also kill ground-dwelling animals like mice and snakes and birds, and there is no bloodless plate. Meanwhile, I live here, my food all comes from about a 10-mile radius around me. I've taken life. I've had to do it. I've killed my own chickens and then I've ate them. And what I've seen in that setting is that animal had one bad moment, one single bad moment, and it was over in a half a second. Their entire life, they lived in pasture, getting taken care of, fed the best possible food. And when it was their time to transform energetically into food for me, for my family, then they had one bad moment and it was over. Now, do I agree with like factory farms and these awful living conditions of animals? No, that's terrible. It's animal slavery. And I actually think I agree with vegans on so much of what they say in that realm. They're dead on. We have to do better in that sense. But this idea that it's morally wrong to eat meat, I just think is short-sighted. It's not the whole picture. There's a catch-22 of existing as a human on this planet, and it is that you are taking life however you choose to live. If you feel good and morally compliant with a vegan diet because you believe you're minimizing that, then I'm not going to try and convince you otherwise. I'm just going to hope that you don't run into nutritional deficiencies that make you sick, that then force you to come back to an animal-based diet, because that's the case that we see so often. I personally have never seen an animal-based diet revert to a vegan diet, and I've seen countless cases of veganism reverting to an animal-based diet and never going back, and realizing that they still might believe in the tenets of veganism, but their physiology weighed more than their philosophy. Because when their body started to fail, and when their digestion shut down, and when the intense brain fog came, and the muscle was wasting away, and the gut was in a mess, and they had to come back to the foods that heal, that there is less of the high horse mentality around only ignorant, inhumane, not conscious people eat meat. I think there's a way in which you can take life honorably and know that it's fueling you to be the healthiest version you can be. And only the healthiest version of you can do the most good in the world. And if we're here to do good in the world, then I think that an animal-based diet is the best thing that you can do. And I would also, this is probably a topic for another conversation, but I would also push back on a lot of the claims that are made around the farming being the biggest issue and global warming, and it's ruining our soils. I think properly done farming is an incredibly way to heal the atmosphere, to heal the soils, to sequester carbon, to create healthier, diverse ecosystems, not to decimate them like a dystopian view of Planet of the Vegans would look like if we do go that way, where everybody's eating fake meat burgers and soybean slop, because that requires an enormous amount of synthetic inputs, chemicals, glyphosate, all of that stuff, and feels chewed down, where the mycorrhizal fungi and the biodiversity of the soils becomes dead. And dead soils can't produce food. And once the food is gone, we're going to have a big problem. And I think that you're never going to have a world where we don't have this input of life living on it. And if we have life living on it, and we need life living on it to sustain the earth itself, and then that just so happens to be the healthiest food that humans can eat to help them thrive, it becomes quite obvious to me that it is perfectly designed by nature. And to think that we can, I don't know, live off smoothies and acai bowls instead is a little bit foolish.
Thank you for wrapping it up and bringing up other issues that are definitely worth looking at and oftentimes very neglected and not seen. And we'll start slowly wrapping up. And before we finish, I have two questions that I would like to ask you. The first one, I really want to make this podcast practical. And you are a very practical person yourself. And I'm curious, what would you recommend to someone listening to this podcast? like one thing to take away, to do or try if they forget everything that we've spoken about, like what is the one thing to try and see what change it can make?
I think the one mental model which hopefully people all take away is this concept of messy action, and that concept has the answer within it. So tangibly speaking, after this, my call to action for you and the listeners is, what are you going to go and do? Not, are you just going to be like, oh, that was kind of cool podcast? Like, what are you going to go do next? What's the thing that you've been neglecting? We talked about play. Look around. Like, are you going to join a gym, join a league that you can play in? Are you going to go buy a jump rope because you used to go doing that? You have to like do one next thing. More than just liking this and subscribing to it, which you should do, by the way. You should share it, because if it helps you, it'll probably help other people. But go do something for you. Probably something that feels a little bit scary, but exciting. I think there's a nice blend of scary and exciting. It's got to be a little bit scary. It's got to kind of make you go like, but it also has to be exciting. And if there's something that lives in that space, if you think, what would be scary and exciting for me? Like, go do the thing. Go sign up for the yoga class. Go buy a meditation cushion and do the thing. Go just take a walk in the woods, but go take some kind of messy action right now without the need for it to be perfect. And that would be my call, would just be to do something.
That's perfectly said, and I couldn't agree more with you. And also, it happens in life that there are bad days that we like don't feel like doing something, and there are people who are struggling more with this, and some people that are not struggling as much with this. What would you recommend? How would you coach this person, or what do you personally do to get through such a day or period?
Yeah, well, first begins with a reminder that a great life still has bad days. A great life still has bad days. Bad days are not because you're a failure. Bad days are not a bug. They are a feature of life. Every single person has bad days. When you find yourself in a bad day, is probably a good opportunity to reframe what you can do in those situations, because those are the moments that will really teach you about who you are and what you're made of. Not when life is sunshine and rainbows and how good you can be on your best days. How not bad can you be on your worst days? And one of the things that is incredibly, it was potentially the most significant mindset switch that I had in my life, was this idea of resistance versus acceptance. When we are having a bad day, it is often because we are in resistance to what is happening. Because a lot of the time life will throw things at us that we certainly didn't choose, and it might be really hard. We might be talking about severely traumatic events. We might be talking about the loss of a loved one. Or we might be talking about resistance to the fact that the barista got your coffee order wrong in the morning and you're all bent out of shape about it. What happens when we're confronted with some adversity is a lot of people resort to this element of resistance, where they start to tell stories. They start to blame and complain. And power follows the blame finger. So when I say, well, I feel this way because of him, or I feel this way because of the weather, or they did this to me, or she did that to me, all true. I'm not saying it's your fault, but it is your responsibility to ask whether that's useful. And most of the time, it is not useful at all. It is a complete loss of personal responsibility and power. It is you arguing with reality. You'll see what a lot of people do is, they shouldn't have done that. He shouldn't have said that. It shouldn't be like this. When the uncomfortable truth of the situation is, they should have done, or it should be, exactly the way that it is, because it is that way. As hard as that is, it is the truth of the way that it is. And it couldn't be any different. There's no amount of your mental gymnastics that will change it. So in a roundabout way, it's perfect. It's perfectly imperfect. And it can suck and still be perfect, because it just is. And if I'm in resistance to it, telling all the stories and saying that this thing is going to be the reason that I crumble, then power has followed the blame finger. So what I have to do, even on the worst days, is firstly accept what is happening. Not argue with reality, because I'll lose that fight every time, but accept it. Like, oh, this one is tough. And what's important now? Is what is important right now continuing to tell the stories and hold anger, or drink away the pain, or smoke away the pain, or hide in my room and scroll TikTok to numb out? Or is what's important now doing the next right thing that will get me one level up on the energy ladder? Even in the most dire circumstances, there is something I can do that will make it a little less dire. And these don't have to be massive things. Nothing in life is made worse by a walk. Nothing. So you could be in the grips of deep grief, and that's hard. Go take a walk. Grieve while walking. It will be better. You might be angry with someone. Go take a walk. Shake it off. Do something to take responsibility for your mood, your attitude. It's a Stoic idea that where your locus of control is. External locus of control is power to everything out there. Internal locus of control is understanding you don't control external events, but you are in full control of how you respond to them. The story that you tell about them, the attitude that you choose, the distinction to be optimistic versus pessimistic in the face of adversity. And to borrow from Viktor Frankl, which is the incredibly powerful little book he wrote, Man's Search for Meaning, it's really the last of the human freedoms to, by the way, for context, this was a guy that wrote a book after surviving the concentration camps during World War II and the Holocaust, and observed why some people made it and some people didn't, all under the same terrible circumstances. And he believed it was this last of the human freedoms to choose, even in the face of the most painful, inhumane adversity, to still control one's state and attitude. To still, even in those moments, choose, you don't take that from me. Life can beat me. Physically, people can beat me. You will not take my mind. And if you can do that, then you are unbreakable. Life will try at some point. Life's going to try and break you. If you're around for long enough, something's going to come and it's going to try and break you. How can you be the kind of person that, this one's a big one. What's important now? I think that skill, working on that skill, is the most freeing and empowering thing a person can find, because it gives them the ability, the confidence to know that no matter what life throws at them, they will not break. And a lot of the time, it's a simple breath and a reminder that what's important right now is just one next thing, one next thought, one next decision, small, but in the direction of your most evolved self, in the direction of your higher self, not in the direction of your lower self, that is going to want to shrink, is going to want to blame and complain, and is going to want to become the victim. How can you become the victor over any circumstance in life?
That's a beautiful way how to wrap it up and finish the podcast. And I really enjoy listening to you and hearing how eloquent you are with your words and sharing your wisdom and empowering people and hopefully listeners. And I really enjoy your coaching. And not many people know that you are also a business coach, not only a holistic health coach. Um, and I would say, and I would love to say one big thank you for coming here as guest to a podcast that I am starting, um, and being a guest to someone like me who is not famous, who doesn't have followers, and who's just really starting. So I want to really appreciate you for that and say really thank you.
Well, thank you for the amazing conversation. And of course, I wanted to support you because you are doing the thing. You are taking the messy action. And anybody that is listening, those are the people I'm always going to support. I could care less how big somebody's Instagram following is or what the potential connection I could get. No, I want to support the people that are doing what we just spoke about in this conversation, that are trying to grow, that are trying to learn, that are taking messy action. And where possible, I will always champion and support those people because I am one of those people. So messy action, do the thing. Thank you for having me. It was wonderful.
Thank you. And tell people where they can find you, where they can reach out to you, listen to you.
Yeah. One of the things I always say on a podcast, because I do genuinely mean this, if you listened and you do find me on Instagram at Peak Primal Health, to send me a DM and let me know that you listened to this show and what you got from it. I love hearing little snippets and what resonated for people and insights. So once again, at Instagram, at Peak Primal Health. And then my podcast is Radical Health Radio. And that's on wherever podcasts do that thing, YouTube, Spotify, Apple, all of that stuff.
I highly recommend people to listen to this podcast because it's really amazing and you're sharing a lot of insights and having great guests on the podcast. So I highly recommend this podcast.
Thank you, Andrea. It's been a pleasure. I appreciate you.
Thank you, Steve. And don't forget, you hold the pen. Keep writing your own story. See you next time on Create Your Life podcast. This podcast is powered by listeners like you. If you found value in these conversations and want to support me, head over to paypal.me/Vyložálková to support me. You can find the link in the episode description.